You have 30 seconds to move to the seat by the toilet, or I'm calling the police to drag you off this plane for ticket fraud." Sarah's voice cut through the first-class cabin like a blade. Conversations died. Glasses stopped mid-air. Every eye turned toward the man in the faded gray hoodie. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't even look embarrassed. He slowly bent down, picked up his boarding pass from the floor, and brushed off the dust. Then he glanced at his watch, and for the first time, he smiled. Not the smile of someone defeated, the smile of someone who had just been given permission. "All right," Marcus said quietly. "Let's see how this plays out." The chaos of JFK International Airport was a physical weight, a cacophony of rolling suitcases, blaring announcements, and the frantic energy of thousands of travelers. But for Marcus, moving through the terminal felt like walking underwater. He was exhausted. He had spent the last 48 hours in a windowless boardroom, negotiating the final acquisition of Horizon Air. The ink on the contract was barely dry. Technically, he now owned every plane, every kiosk, and every bag of peanuts in this terminal. But nobody knew that. To the world passing him by, Marcus wasn't a tech billionaire who had just saved a failing airline from bankruptcy. He was just a black man in a faded gray hoodie, worn-out jeans, and a pair of dusty Nike sneakers that had seen better days. He walked with a slight limp, a remnant of a college football injury, not laziness, and carried a battered backpack that held a laptop worth more than most cars. He was here for a truth audit. He wanted to see how his new company treated the invisible people, the ones who didn't wear Italian suits. He reached the gate for Flight 404 to London. He approached the first-class lane. The gate agent didn't look up at him. She just pointed vaguely toward the scanner, her eyes glazing over his attire. Marcus didn't mind. Invisibility was his superpower. He boarded the plane, head down, hoping to catch a few hours of sleep before the real work began in London. Then, the hurricane arrived. Her name was Tiffany. She didn't just enter the jet bridge, she announced herself. She was a swirl of expensive perfume, platinum blonde extensions, and logos. Her luggage was Louis Vuitton, her sunglasses were Gucci, and her attitude was pure, unfiltered entitlement. She was 22, the daughter of a minor hedge fund manager who was a platinum donor to the airline, and she wielded her father's status like a loaded weapon. "Careful with that," Tiffany snapped at a struggling elderly man who accidentally brushed against her carry-on. "That leather scratches if you even look at it wrong." She marched down the jet bridge, holding her phone up, the ring light blindingly bright. She was live streaming. "Hey guys, we are finally boarding," she chirped into the camera, her voice pitching up an octave. "First-class vibes only today. I'm going to show you the setup. Daddy got me the best seat." Marcus had already settled into seat 1A. It was the prime spot. Maximum legroom, best window view, perfect privacy. He had his headphones on, eyes closed, trying to block out the world. Tiffany stopped at the entrance of the cabin. She looked at her boarding pass. Seat 2B, aisle, second row. Her face fell. The lighting in 2B was terrible. The angle was wrong. She couldn't film her takeoff aesthetic from the second row. She looked at seat 1A. It was bathed in the perfect golden hour sunlight streaming through the window, and then she saw who was sitting there. Tiffany lowered her phone, her expression shifting from influencer bright to disgusted. She saw the gray hoodie. She saw the frayed edges of the backpack tucked under the seat. And finally, her eyes landed on Marcus's shoes. They were comfortable, practical sneakers, coated in a fine layer of dust from his walk through the city earlier. To Tiffany, they looked like garbage. She flagged down the lead flight attendant, Sarah. Sarah was a veteran of the skies, a woman who prided herself on maintaining the exclusive atmosphere of the premium cabin. She had a tight smile for the men in suits and a flirtatious wink for the pilots. But when she looked at Marcus, her face was a mask of cold suspicion. "Sarah, darling," Tiffany whined, loud enough for the first 5 rows to hear. "There must be a mistake. I specifically asked for the window seat with the light, and—" She gestured vaguely at Marcus with a manicured hand. "Why is he in here?" Sarah stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. She looked at Tiffany, at the gleaming red soles of her Louboutins, the pristine designer bag, the diamond tennis bracelet. It screamed money. It screamed valid. Then Sarah turned her gaze to Marcus. She didn't look at his face, she looked down. The camera of our mind zooms in on this moment. We see Sarah's polished black heels on the plush carpet. Then, we cut to Marcus's dusty, creased sneakers. Sarah's lip curled. It was a micro-expression, gone in a second, but it revealed everything. Disdain, judgment, the assumption that poverty is a contagion that can dirty the clean lines of luxury. "He looks like a janitor," Tiffany whispered, leaning in close to Sarah but ensuring her voice carried. "Did he sneak in to fix the seat? It smells like old gym clothes in here now. I can't stream with him in the background. It ruins the aesthetic." Sarah nodded. A silent pact formed between them, the pact of the privileged protecting their territory. "Let me check the manifest, Ms. Tiffany," Sarah said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We can't have unauthorized personnel occupying premium seats. Sometimes the ground crew gets confused about where they can take their breaks." She didn't check the manifest. She didn't look at her tablet. She made a decision based entirely on the dust on a man's shoes. Sarah straightened her blazer, put on her enforcer face, and marched towards seat 1A. She didn't approach him as a paying customer. She approached him as a stain that needed to be removed. Marcus opened his eyes as her shadow fell over him. He saw the look in her eyes, the same look he had seen 1,000 times growing up in the projects, the look that said, "You don't belong here." "Excuse me," Sarah said, her tone sharp and devoid of the welcome aboard warmth she had shown the man in the suit behind them. "We have a problem with your seat." Marcus sat up, pulling his headphones down. He looked tired, yes, but his eyes were sharp. He looked from Sarah to Tiffany, who was standing behind the flight attendant, smirking and tapping her foot, impatient to claim the throne she believed was hers by birthright. The injustice wasn't loud yet. It was quiet. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of being judged not for who you are, but for what you wear. And in the bustling cabin of Flight 404, the air was suddenly very thin. The air in the first-class cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees as Sarah stepped fully into Marcus's personal space. She didn't use the polite, hushed tone reserved for premium passengers, the whisper that asked if you wanted a hot towel or more champagne. Instead, she adopted the volume of a school principal scolding a truant child. She wanted an audience. She wanted the cabin to witness the restoration of order. "Sir," Sarah said, the word landing heavy with sarcasm, "I need to see your boarding pass. Now!" Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't scramble to find it, nor did he look intimidated. With agonizingly slow movements, he reached into the front pocket of his hoodie. To Sarah, this looked suspicious. To Marcus, it was just fatigue. He pulled out the printed pass, he was old school that way, and held it out. Sarah snatched it from his hand. She didn't scan it, she didn't check the date, she barely even looked at the name. Her eyes scanned only for what she wanted to see. A mistake. A reason to reject him. "This," Sarah announced, waving the paper in the air like a piece of evidence, "is clearly a system error, or perhaps a duplicate printout you found in the trash." She looked down at him, her hands on her hips, blocking the sunlight from the window. "We have a high-value guest, a Diamond Medallion member, who needs this seat for legitimate business purposes," Sarah lied, glancing back at Tiffany, who was busy taking a selfie with a pouty face. "And quite frankly, sir, this cabin has a dress code. It's an unwritten rule of decorum. Your appearance is distressing the other guests." The tech CEO in row 2 looked up from his iPad, frowning. He wasn't distressed by Marcus's hoodie, he was distressed by Sarah's shouting. But he said nothing. In the ecosystem of luxury travel, nobody wanted to cross the gatekeepers. Marcus looked up at Sarah. His expression was unreadable. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't anger. It was a profound, weary disappointment. "My ticket is valid," Marcus said. His voice was soft, a deep baritone that carried a velvet weight. He spoke with the precise, articulated diction of a man who had spent decades commanding boardrooms, though Sarah was too deafened by her own bias to hear it. "I paid full fare. I am not moving." This was the match in the powder keg. If Marcus had shouted, if he had cursed, if he had acted ghetto as she expected him to, Sarah would have felt justified. She would have felt comfortable. She knew how to handle angry people. You just escalated until you won. But she didn't know how to handle quiet. Marcus's calmness stripped away her authority. It made her look like the hysterical one. It made her power feel fragile. And nothing makes a petty tyrant more dangerous than feeling ignored. Sarah's face flushed a blotchy red. She leaned in, invading his space, her perfume cloying and overpowering. "Listen to me," she hissed, abandoning all pretense of customer service. "You think because you managed to sneak past the gate agent that you own the place? I know your type. You buy a coach ticket, steal a seat up front, and hope nobody notices. Well, I noticed." She pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the plane, past the curtain, toward the dark, cramped rows of economy. "This seat is for real VIPs, Sarah declared, her voice rising to a shrill pitch that silenced the entire front cabin. "People who contribute to society, people who belong here. You are going to take your bag. You are going to get up, and you are going to walk to the back of the plane. Row 32, seat F, right next to the lavatory. That fits your budget better." Marcus adjusted his glasses. He looked at Tiffany, who was now snickering behind her hand, filming the entire interaction. Then he looked back at Sarah. "I am the owner of this seat," Marcus repeated, his voice remaining level, though a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. "And I advise you to check the manifest properly before you make a decision you cannot undo." "Are you threatening me?" Sarah gasped, clutching her pearls in a performance of victimhood worthy of an Oscar. "Did you all hear that? He just threatened a flight crew member." She turned to the cabin, seeking validation. "I don't need to check a manifest to know a fraud when I see one," she spat at Marcus. "I have been flying for 15 years. I know who belongs in first class, and it is certainly not a man wearing a hoodie that looks like it was used to wash a car." She straightened up, crossing her arms. "I am giving you a choice," she announced, her voice booming with the toxic confidence of someone who believes the rules protect them, not the truth. "You move voluntarily, right now, or I call the airport police. I will have you dragged off this plane in handcuffs, banned from this airline, and prosecuted for theft of services. Is that what you want? Do you want to go to jail over a seat?" Marcus looked at her. He saw the glee in her eyes. She wasn't just doing a job. She was enjoying the humiliation. She was enjoying the power to displace a black man to make room for a white girl. He took a slow breath. He realized then that logic would not work here. Reason had left the building the moment he walked on board. "Call them," Marcus said simply, "but make sure you spell my name right on the police report." Sarah's eyes bulged. She hadn't expected him to call her bluff. Her authority was fracturing, and she had only one card left to play: brute force. She reached for the intercom phone on the wall, her hand trembling with rage. She was about to escalate this from a dispute to a war, completely unaware that she was declaring war on the general of the army. The cabin had transformed from a sanctuary of luxury into a coliseum of judgment. Sarah was on the intercom phone, her voice shrill as she demanded the cockpit's attention. But Tiffany decided that the pilot's arrival wasn't happening fast enough. She needed to accelerate the process. She needed to make Marcus not just an inconvenience, but a threat. Tiffany dropped her phone to her side, letting the live stream capture her vulnerable angle. She let out a small, trembling gasp, clutching her designer handbag to her chest as if it were a shield.
"Sarah,"
Tiffany whimpered, her voice pitching into a perfect, practiced frequency of distress. I don't feel safe. The way he's looking at me, it's aggressive. He's scaring me." She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing a single, photogenic tear to roll down her cheek. "Please," Tiffany begged, looking around at the other passengers. "I just want to go to Miami. Why is he doing this to us?" It was a masterclass in manipulation, weaponizing the fragility of a young white woman against the presence of a black man. And it worked instantly. The atmosphere in first class shifted from annoyance to open hostility. The bystander effect evaporated, replaced by a mob mentality fueled by privilege and impatience. "Hey!" the tech CEO in row 2 shouted, standing up. He was a man used to getting his way, and seeing a young girl cry was the permission structure he needed to be a hero. You heard her, buddy. You're scaring the lady. Get your bag and get out.
This is ridiculous,
The woman with the pearls hissed, holding up her iPhone to record Marcus. I have a connection to make in London. You are being selfish. You are holding up the entire plane because you're too proud to admit you stole a seat. Security! Someone else yelled from the back. Throw him off! A sea of smartphones rose like tombstones. Their black lenses pointed squarely at Marcus. He was being documented, live-streamed, and judged by millions of invisible eyes before he had even spoken a word in his defense. He sat in the center of the storm, isolated, a solitary island of calm amidst a hurricane of accusations. He looked at the faces around him, faces twisted with self-righteous anger. They didn't see a human being, they saw a delay. They saw a problem to be deleted so their comfortable lives could resume. Then, the cockpit door burst open. Captain Vance stepped out. He was a towering figure, silver-haired, jawline carved from granite, looking every inch the hero pilot from a movie poster. He adjusted his cap, his 4 gold stripes catching the light. He didn't look at the passengers. He looked straight at Sarah, who was pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. Is this the individual? Vance asked, his voice a deep rumble of authority. Yes, Captain, Sarah said, breathless. He refuses to show ID. He's threatening the passengers. Miss Tiffany is terrified. Vance turned his gaze to Marcus. He didn't ask for Marcus's side of the story. He didn't ask to see the ticket. He had already made his verdict in the cockpit based on Sarah's frantic call. Vance marched over to seat 1A, looming over Marcus. Sir, Vance said, his voice cold and final. I am the commander of this vessel. My word is law. You have disrupted my flight crew and distressed my passengers. Marcus looked up, meeting the captain's eyes. I have a valid ticket, Captain. If you check your system, I don't need to check anything. Vance cut him off, leaning down, his face hardening. I have a flight to fly. I don't have time for games. Now you have 2 options. Vance held up 2 fingers. Option 1. You voluntarily relocate to the seat Sarah assigned you. You sit down, you shut up, and we take off. He lowered 1 finger. Option 2. I call the Port Authority. You will be arrested for interfering with a flight crew, a federal felony. I will personally see to it that you are placed on the national no-fly list. You will never set foot on an airplane again. Not just this airline, any airline. You will take the bus for the rest of your life. The threat hung in the air, heavy and brutal. The no-fly list. The ultimate excommunication for a modern businessman. Marcus looked at Vance. He saw the arrogance. He saw the complete lack of curiosity or fairness. Then he looked past Vance at the other passengers. He saw a young mother in row 4, clutching a baby, looking terrified that the flight would be canceled. He saw an elderly couple holding hands, anxious. If Marcus fought this now, if he waited for the police, the flight would be delayed for hours. Everyone would suffer. The innocent would pay for the sins of the guilty. Marcus sighed. It was the heavy sigh of a man who knows he has to lose the battle to win the war. Fine, Marcus said quietly. The tension in the cabin broke instantly. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Tiffany clapped her hands giddily, wiping away the fake tear. Finally, she squealed. Marcus stood up. He grabbed his battered backpack. He didn't look defeated, he looked deliberate. He smoothed the front of his hoodie. I will move, Marcus said, his voice steady. Not because you are right, Captain, but because I will not be the reason these people are late. He stepped out into the aisle. Sarah smirked, stepping back to let him pass, a look of supreme triumph on her face. She had won. She had put him in his place. As Marcus passed the captain and the lead flight attendant, he stopped. The distance between them was intimate, uncomfortable. Marcus looked at the gold nameplate pinned to the captain's chest. Captain J. Vance. Then he looked at the silver wing pinned to Sarah's blazer. Sarah M. He memorized them. He leaned in close, so close that only the two of them could hear him over the ambient noise of the cabin. Captain Vance. Sarah, Marcus whispered, his voice carrying a strange, chilling finality. Make sure the service is excellent today. He paused, a small, cold smile touching his lips. And enjoy your last flight. Before they could process the words, Marcus turned and began the long walk down the aisle, past the curtain, disappearing into the crowded, noisy obscurity of the economy cabin. Sarah shivered, rubbing her arms as if a ghost had just walked through her. She shook it off, turning a bright, fake smile to Tiffany. "Champagne, Miss Tiffany?" Sarah asked. "God, yes!" Tiffany laughed, settling into seat 1A. "I need to wash the smell of poverty out of my hair." Up front, they popped the cork. In the back, Marcus opened his laptop. The countdown had begun. The curtain separating business class from economy didn't just divide the plane, it divided two different worlds. As Marcus stepped through it, the air changed. The scent of fresh orchids and expensive perfume vanished, replaced immediately by the stagnant, recycled air of 300 people breathing in close quarters. The soft jazz of the boarding music was drowned out by the cacophony of crying infants, the clatter of overhead bins being slammed shut, and the dull roar of the auxiliary power unit. Marcus walked the length of the aisle, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He passed row 10, row 20, row 30. Heads turned as he walked by, not with the judgmental glare of the first-class elite, but with the tired, sympathetic glances of fellow travelers who knew the misery of the back of the bus. He finally reached row 32. It was the penalty box of aviation, the very last row. The seats didn't recline because they were backed right up against the galley wall. To his right was the lavatory door, which opened and closed with a rhythmic whoosh, releasing a waft of blue chemical disinfectant and human misery every 30 seconds. Seat 32F, the window seat, though the window was missing, replaced by a plastic wall panel because of the structural ribbing of the fuselage. Marcus squeezed into the seat, his knees jammed instantly against the plastic tray table of row 31. A toddler in the middle seat looked at him with sticky hands and wailed. Any other billionaire would have been on the phone with their lawyer by now, screaming for a private jet. Marcus just adjusted his hoodie. He wasn't angry anymore, he was focused. The humiliation he had endured in first class had clarified his mission. He wasn't here to test the champagne, he was here to test the integrity of the entire organism. And now, he had the perfect vantage point. He placed his battered backpack on his lap. To the casual observer, and certainly to Sarah and Tiffany, the bag looked like something found at a Goodwill store. The canvas was faded, the zippers were tarnished. But as Marcus unzipped the main compartment, he didn't pull out a sandwich or a paperback novel. He pulled out a laptop. It was a thick black brick of a machine. It had no Apple logo, no Dell sticker. It was a custom-built chassis, reinforced with carbon fiber, designed for field operations in environments far more hostile than a commercial flight. The lid was covered in matte black tape, hiding the branding of the defense contractor that had manufactured it. Marcus opened the lid. He didn't press a power button. He swiped a biometric sensor on the side. The screen didn't glow with a friendly Windows desktop or a colorful Mac background. It flickered to life with a stark, brutalist interface, lines of emerald green text cascading down a midnight black terminal. The teenager sitting in 32D, who had been loudly playing a game on his Nintendo Switch, glanced over. He froze. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he knew it wasn't Excel. It looked like the code from the Matrix. "Whoa," the kid whispered. "Are you hacking the plane?" Marcus didn't look up. His fingers began to dance across the mechanical keyboard. It wasn't the slow, hunt-and-peck typing of a casual user. It was a blur. It was the virtuoso performance of a pianist playing a concerto he had written himself. "No, son," Marcus murmured, his eyes scanning the waterfall of data. "I'm not hacking. I'm just checking the oil." This was the secret Marcus had kept from the world. He wasn't just a suit who bought companies. Before the billions, before the acquisitions, Marcus was a prodigy. 20 years ago, sitting in a dorm room not much bigger than this toilet, he had written the core architecture for Aerolink, the very operating system that ran the logistics, scheduling, and personnel management for half the airlines in the Western Hemisphere, including this one. He knew this system better than he knew his own family. He knew its back doors. He knew its skeletons. Captain Vance thought he was the commander of the vessel because he held the yoke. Sarah thought she was the queen because she held the passenger manifest. But Marcus? Marcus was the god of the machine. He held the source code. The interface shifted. Suddenly, the entire digital nervous system of the airline was laid bare before him. He saw the flight plan. He saw the fuel load. He saw the payroll data for every crew member on board. He navigated to the crew management subsystem. He pulled up the file for Flight 404. Marcus stared at their digital profiles. He saw their service records. He saw their commendations. And he saw the notes from previous flights, complaints about attitude that had been swept under the rug by middle management. He wasn't just looking at data, he was looking at the cancer eating his new company from the inside out. He opened a new terminal window. This was the Admin Override Console, a tool designed for the CEO to take immediate control during a catastrophic corporate crisis. Up in first class, Tiffany was clinking glasses with the tech CEO. Captain Vance was running through his pre-flight checklist, feeling powerful and secure. Sarah was laughing in the galley, gossiping about the trash she had taken out. They had no idea that 60 meters behind them, sitting next to a toilet, the man they had discarded was about to turn their world off. Marcus looked at the enter key. He didn't smile. This wasn't revenge. It was a correction. Click. He pressed the key. On the screen, a progress bar shot from 0% to 100% in a nanosecond. Marcus closed the laptop lid halfway, leaning back against the hard, non-reclining seat. He crossed his arms and waited. He knew exactly how long it would take for the signal to travel from his laptop, up to the satellite, down to the airline server in Chicago, and back to the cockpit of Flight 404. 5, 4, 3, 2. The Boeing 737 sat on the tarmac, a 60-ton beast ready to be unleashed. In the cockpit, Captain Vance was in his element. He tapped the flight management computer with a confident rhythm, his earlier irritation with the passenger in 1A already a distant memory. He had restored order. He had protected the sanctity of his ship. Now, it was time to fly. "Requesting pushback," Vance said into his headset, his voice crisp. "All systems green. Let's get this bird in the air and get me a scotch." His co-pilot, a younger man named Jenkins, chuckled. "You got it, Cap. APU is running. Hydraulics are pressurized. Ready on your mark." Vance reached for the ignition switch for engine number 1. He loved this moment. The deep, guttural whine of the turbines spinning up, the vibration of power coming alive beneath his fingertips. He flipped the switch. Nothing happened. There was no whine, no vibration, no roar of burning kerosene. Vance frowned. He flipped it again. "That's weird," he muttered. "Ignition circuit is dead. Jenkins, check the breakers." "Breakers are in, Cap," Jenkins replied, his brow furrowing. "Let me try the APU restart." Jenkins reached for the overhead panel, and then the world ended. It didn't happen with an explosion. It happened with a sound far more terrifying to a pilot, the sound of silence. Click. The low hum of the avionics fans died. The air conditioning vents, which had been blasting cold air, sputtered and stopped. The ambient noise of the cockpit, the life support of the plane, vanished instantly. Then, the lights went out. For a heartbeat, the cockpit was pitch black. Vance and Jenkins sat in stunned darkness, the sun outside the narrow windows the only source of illumination. "What the hell did you touch?" Vance barked, panic spiking in his chest. "We just lost total electrical." "I didn't touch anything," Jenkins yelled back, his hands hovering uselessly over the dark console. "The bus ties just opened. The batteries are disconnected. We're a brick, Cap." Before Vance could grab the emergency checklist, the screens came back to life. But they didn't show the artificial horizon. They didn't show the engine stats or the navigation map. Every single screen, the primary flight display, the ICAS, even the small backup digital clock, flashed a single synchronized color. Red. It was a blood-red glow that bathed the cockpit in a hellish light, reflecting off the beads of sweat that were instantly forming on Vance's forehead. In the center of every screen, in stark, blinking white text, a message appeared. It wasn't a standard Boeing error code. It wasn't a mechanical warning. Vance stared at the screen. He blinked, thinking he was hallucinating. "CEO level?" Vance whispered, his voice trembling. "What does that mean? Is that a software update?" He grabbed the yoke and shook it. Dead. He punched the buttons on the flight computer. Unresponsive. He tried the radio to call the tower. Static. "We're locked out," Jenkins said, his voice rising in terror. "Cap, we can't talk to the tower. We can't start the engines. We can't even open the electronic door lock. We're trapped." Vance slammed his fist against the glare shield. "Get maintenance on the line! Use your cell phone! Get someone out here now!" Outside the cockpit, the situation was deteriorating even faster. When the power died, the airflow stopped. The plane, sitting on the concrete under the midday sun, began to heat up immediately. It was a greenhouse effect. The temperature in the cabin rose 5 degrees in 2 minutes. In first class, the illusion of luxury evaporated the moment the air conditioning died. Tiffany, sitting in seat 1A, was the first to break. She had been mid-pose for a selfie, holding a glass of champagne. Now the cabin was silent, eerie, and getting stuffy. "Why is it so quiet?" Tiffany demanded, her voice cutting through the hush. "And why is it getting hot? My makeup is going to melt!" She pressed the call button. Nothing happened. No ding. "Sarah!" Tiffany screamed. "Sarah! The service button is broken! I need ice water! Now!" Sarah came rushing out of the galley. She looked frazzled. Her pristine uniform was already showing damp patches under the arms. She was holding her own tablet, tapping it furiously. I'm sorry, Miss Tiffany," Sarah stammered, looking at the dead device in her hands. "My tablet is frozen. The galley power is out. I can't access the fridge locks. I can't get the ice." "You can't get ice?" Tiffany shrieked, looking at Sarah as if she had admitted to murder. "I paid $2,000 for this seat. This is unacceptable. Get the pilot. Tell him to turn the air back on." "I'm trying," Sarah cried, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. She ran to the cockpit door and pounded on it. "Captain, the passengers are suffocating. What is going on?" The door didn't open. It couldn't. The electronic maglocks were sealed shut by the system override. Down on the tarmac, a confused ground crew surrounded the nose gear. A senior mechanic plugged a heavy-duty diagnostic computer into the external port of the plane. He frowned, tapping the keys. He checked the connection. He hit the side of his machine. "What's the word?" Vance yelled through the open side window of the cockpit, hanging halfway out, his dignity completely gone. "Fix it!" The mechanic looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. He looked baffled. "I can't, Captain," the mechanic shouted back. "The plane isn't talking to me. It's rejecting the diagnostic tool. It says the owner has remote-locked the asset." "The owner?" Vance screamed. "The airline is the owner! Call headquarters!" "We did!" the mechanic yelled. "HQ says they didn't send the command. They don't know who did!" Inside the plane, panic was setting in. The heat was rising. Babies were crying. The wealthy passengers in first class were fanning themselves with safety cards, their expensive suits sticking to their backs. It was a scene of total, helpless chaos. The unsolvable problem had turned a multi-million-dollar machine into a useless metal sauna. And 60 meters away, in the very last row, sitting next to the toilet, Marcus was cool. He wasn't sweating. He had opened the small manual air vent above his head before the system locked down, trapping a pocket of residual cool air around him. He watched the chaos unfold on his screen. He saw the lines of code scrolling, the frantic attempts by the mechanic outside to bypass his firewall. Marcus smiled. It was cute. It was like watching a toddler try to pick a bank vault lock with a plastic spoon. The teenager next to him, the one playing the Nintendo Switch, looked at Marcus's screen again. He saw the red "Access Denied" warning that mirrored what was happening in the cockpit. "Dude," the kid whispered, eyes wide. Is that the plane?" Marcus stopped typing for a second. He turned to the kid. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a granola bar, the only meal he would get today since Sarah had denied him service. "Sometimes," Marcus whispered, peeling the wrapper with a calm, deliberate sound that seemed deafening in the silent plane. "You have to turn it off and on again to get rid of the bugs." He took a bite. "And there are a lot of bugs on this flight." Up front, Captain Vance was screaming into his cell phone. Sarah was being yelled at by Tiffany. The mechanic was kicking the tire. Marcus took another bite, watched the cursor blink, and waited for the phone call that he knew was exactly 30 seconds away. The call that would change everything. The heat in the cockpit was now stifling. Sweat ran freely down Captain Vance's neck, soaking his pristine white collar. The flight deck, usually a sanctuary of cool logic and automated precision, had become a claustrophobic metal box. Outside, the ground crew looked like ants scurrying around a dead beetle. Inside, the red screens continued to pulse their silent, mocking message. Access denied. Vance's personal cell phone vibrated violently on the center console, dancing across the plastic surface. He grabbed it. The caller ID displayed, Director of Ops, Priority. Vance answered it like a drowning man clutching a life raft. Director! Vance shouted, bypassing pleasantries. Thank God! We are down hard. Total systems failure. The computer is locked out. It's some kind of cyber attack. You need to get the feds involved. We have a hacker on board. Shut up, Vance. The voice on the other end wasn't calm. It was a roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated administrative terror. It was Mr. Henderson, the director of flight operations, a man who hadn't raised his voice in 10 years. There is no hacker, Henderson screamed, his voice distorting through the tiny speaker. We just got a flag from the central server in Chicago. That Omega error code you're seeing? That isn't a glitch. That's the kill switch. Vance wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Kill switch? What are you talking about? Who has the codes for a kill switch? Only one person, Henderson snapped. The owner of the airline. Vance blinked, the sweat stinging his eyes. The owner? You mean the board? No, you idiot! Didn't you read the memo this morning? Henderson's voice was shaking now. The acquisition went through last night. The board is gone. We were bought out by King Tech Ventures. We have a new chairman, a single majority shareholder. Vance felt a cold knot form in his stomach, sitting heavy amidst the heat. Okay, fine. So we have a new boss. What does that have to do with my dead plane? Because the system shows that the lockdown command originated from inside your cabin, Henderson yelled. The new chairman isn't in Chicago, Vance. He's on your plane. He's flying undercover to evaluate the fleet integration. The silence that followed was louder than the screaming engines would have been. Vance looked at his co-pilot, Jenkins. Jenkins looked back, eyes wide. That's impossible, Vance stammered, his mind racing through the passenger list. I reviewed the manifest personally. I greeted the VIPs. We have Tiffany, the influencer. We have Mr. Roberts, the CEO of Techstar. We have the senator's wife. There is no chairman on this plane. Don't tell me who isn't there, Henderson barked. I am looking at his live geotag right now. He checked in under a pseudonym, but his device signature is unmistakable. He is on flight 404, and he just manually overrode your avionics. Vance spun around in his seat, looking at the closed, locked cockpit door. Where? He whispered. Where is he sitting? I'll go apologize. I'll fix this. Is he in 1A? Is he the guy in 2F? There was a pause on the line, a pause filled with the sound of furious typing on the other end. Vance, Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was far scarier than his shouting. The system shows his device is connected to the shear wall port. In row 32. Row 32? Vance repeated, the number not making sense. That's economy. That's the back wall. Seat 32F, Henderson read out. The window seat, right next to the rear lavatory. Vance froze. His heart actually skipped a beat. Seat 32F. The memory hit him like a physical blow. The image flashed in his mind. The man in the gray hoodie, the dusty sneakers, the calm, deep voice. The man Sarah had called a fraud. The man he had threatened to put on the no-fly list. Oh my God, Vance whispered. The phone nearly slipped from his sweaty fingers. Vance? Henderson asked urgently. Do you have a passenger in 32F? A black male, late 30s, probably dressed casually. That's Marcus King. He's the guy who just signed your paycheck. Please tell me you treated him well. Vance couldn't breathe. The air in the cockpit felt thin, non-existent. He remembered pointing his finger in the man's face. He remembered saying, "You will take the bus for the rest of your life." He remembered the man's parting words, "Enjoy your last flight." "Vance!" Henderson screamed. "Answer me! Did you downgrade the chairman of the board? Vance lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Jenkins. The co-pilot was pale, having pieced it together himself. We didn't just downgrade him, Jenkins whispered, his voice trembling. We threatened to arrest him. Vance stood up. His legs felt like jelly. The arrogance that had defined his career, the 4 stripes on his shoulder that gave him his identity, it all crumbled into dust. He wasn't a captain anymore. He was a dead man walking. Open the door, Vance croaked. We can't, Jenkins said. It's mag-locked. Break it down, Vance screamed, grabbing the emergency crash axe from the wall. Break it down before he dissolves the entire airline. Outside in the cabin, the passengers were growing restless. But in the cockpit, the terror was absolute. They hadn't just insulted a passenger, they had declared war on a god. And now, they had to walk into the belly of the beast to beg for mercy. The cockpit door didn't open with authority this time. It was pried open. The magnetic locks disengaged only after the entire system had been flushed by the command from row 32. Captain Vance stepped out first. The air in the cabin was thick, hot, and silent. He was no longer the granite-jawed hero of the sky. His cap was in his hand. His silver hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. His eyes were wide, darting around like a trapped animal. Behind him came Sarah, the impeccable lead flight attendant who had terrorized the cabin only 20 minutes ago, looked like a ghost. Her makeup was running. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to clasp them together to stop the trembling. "Where are you going?" Tiffany demanded from seat 1A, fanning herself with a safety card. "Is the air coming back on? Captain, I'm talking to you!" Vance didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. He walked past the luxury seats he had protected so fiercely. He walked past the business class curtain. It was the longest walk of his life, the walk of shame. He moved down the narrow aisle of economy. Hundreds of eyes followed him. These were the passengers he had ignored, the cattle class he rarely acknowledged. Now he had to walk past every single one of them to reach his judge. Sarah trailed behind him, her heels clicking unevenly on the carpet. She felt the weight of every gaze. She felt the judgment she had dished out returning to her tenfold. They reached the back of the plane. Row 30, row 31, and finally row 32. The smell of the lavatory disinfectant was strong here. The space was cramped. And there, squeezed into seat 32F, bathed in the soft blue light of his laptop screen, sat Marcus. He didn't look up immediately. He typed one final command, his fingers moving with a relaxed, rhythmic precision. Enter. He closed the laptop lid with a soft snap. Marcus turned his head. He looked at the sweaty, terrified captain towering over him. He looked at Sarah, who was chewing her lip, tears streaming down her face. Mr. King, Vance whispered. His voice was a dry croak. Sir, Marcus adjusted his glasses. He didn't stand up, he didn't need to. Power isn't about height, it's about presence. Captain Vance, Marcus said, his voice calm, conversational, as if they were meeting for coffee and not in the middle of a corporate execution. And Sarah, you made excellent time. Sir, please, Sarah sobbed, finally breaking. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know it was you. If I had known... Stop, Marcus said. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his hand. He just dropped the word like a stone, and it silenced her instantly. Marcus finally stood up. He grabbed his battered backpack and stepped into the aisle, forcing Vance and Sarah to step back, shrinking them further. That is your defense? Marcus asked, looking them dead in the eye. That you didn't know I was the chairman? He shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment on his face. That makes it worse, Sarah. If you had treated me with respect only because you knew I was rich, that wouldn't be service. That would be sycophancy. He looked at Vance. I didn't lock down this plane because you moved my seat, Captain. I can sit by a toilet. I grew up in a house smaller than this cabin. I don't need legroom to feel important. Marcus gestured to the passengers watching in stunned silence. The mother with the baby, the elderly couple, the teenager with the switch. I grounded this flight, Marcus continued, his voice rising just enough so the surrounding rows could hear, because I saw how you treat the people who don't have power. You looked at my clothes, and you decided I was trash. You looked at my skin, and you decided I was a criminal. You measured my worth by the dust on my shoes." Tiffany had run down the aisle now, holding her phone, eager to catch the drama. "Wait, who is this guy?" she asked, camera rolling. "Why is the pilot crying?" Marcus turned to her, then back to his employees. "You have forgotten the core mission of this company," Marcus declared. "We move people, all people, not just the ones with Gucci bags." He tapped his smartwatch. "As of 1 minute ago, your employee IDs have been deactivated. Your pensions are frozen pending review, and your access to any King Tech Ventures property is revoked." Vance's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the seat back to steady himself. "Sir, my career, 20 years." "You spent 20 years flying," Marcus said cold. "But you never learned how to see. You're fired. Get off my plane." The aftermath was swift and surgical. Because the plane had never technically taken off, the destination was simply back to the gate. But the world outside had changed. When the jet bridge reconnected, it wasn't the ground crew waiting. It was a phalanx of airport police and 2 men in dark suits from corporate security. Captain Vance and Sarah were escorted off the plane first. There was no dignity in their exit. Vance, stripped of his epaulets, looked like a hollow shell. Sarah, sobbing into her hands, couldn't even look at the passengers she had sneered at. As they walked up the ramp, they passed the very spot where Sarah had thrown Marcus's ticket on the floor. The karma was absolute. Then came Tiffany. She tried to storm off, flipping her hair, assuming she was immune to the consequences because she wasn't an employee. "This is the worst service ever!" she yelled at a security officer. "I'm tweeting this! My dad knows the owner!" "Actually," a deep voice said from behind her. Marcus stepped onto the jet bridge. He had his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked tired but lighter. "Your dad knows the previous owner," Marcus corrected. "I'm the owner now." Tiffany froze. The color drained from her face as the realization hit her. The janitor in the hoodie. The man she had mocked for her live stream. Marcus signaled to the security chief. "Ms. Tiffany is banned from this airline," Marcus said calmly, "and any airline in the King Tech network. Refund her ticket. She can find another way to Miami. Maybe the bus fits her aesthetic better." Tiffany was led away screaming, her live stream capturing the exact moment her privilege evaporated. Marcus didn't leave. He turned back to the gate area where the rest of the confused, exhausted passengers were disembarking. They looked at him with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. They didn't know if they should clap or be afraid. Marcus climbed onto a row of waiting area chairs. He wasn't a billionaire on a pedestal, he was a leader standing among his people. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice projecting clearly, "I apologize for the delay today. I know you are tired. I know you just want to get home." He looked at the mother with the baby. He looked at the teenager. "What you saw today was ugly, but it was necessary. We are tearing out the rot so we can build something better. Horizon Air is dead. Today we start over." He pulled out his phone. "I have instructed my team to issue a full refund to every single passenger on Flight 404. Plus, each of you will receive a voucher for 5 free round-trip tickets to anywhere we fly, valid for life." The crowd stared in silence for a second. Then a roar of applause erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was cheering. The mother wiped a tear. The teenager pumped his fist. "But," Marcus added, raising a hand, "I ask one thing in return." The room went quiet. "Next time you see someone who looks like they don't belong," Marcus said, looking at his own dusty sneakers. "Next time you see a hoodie, or a messy backpack, or a struggle, don't judge. Be kind. You never know who you're talking to." He hopped down from the chair. He didn't get into a limousine. He didn't have an entourage. He hoisted his backpack, adjusted his hoodie, and walked toward the exit, blending back into the crowd. Camera pans slowly over the empty, silent runway, then fades to a montage of Marcus shaking hands with new, diverse flight crews. Sarah and Captain Vance lost everything because they trusted their eyes instead of their hearts. They thought power wore a suit. They forgot that the most powerful force in the world is the truth. Marcus King didn't just buy an airline that day. He bought back dignity for everyone who has ever been overlooked. Never judge a book by its cover. The person you push aside today might be the only one who can save you tomorrow.